Parm Sandhu is former Chief Superintendent of the Met and author of the splendid memoir Black and Blue, and we always appreciate her insight. Parm, most people watching won't actually know what Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary is. So is this actually a serious, meaningful sanction on the Met, or just a little bit of accountability theatre?
I actually think it's a welcome intervention, and it can actually produce some results, because the Met have been found, as you've just quite rightly said, they haven't been answering the 999 calls, they've not been dealing with vulnerable victims, they haven't been going to burglaries, and they've not been recording the crimes. So it's an intervention that's needed, but I do think that it could make a difference, because the Met have to look after their communities, they have to look after the people of London. And if you're not doing basic crime work, then what are you doing? So I actually welcome that intervention, and I feel that it could result in some changes.
It's tempting to think that with the rise in crime, the police are just overwhelmed. But one of the reasons why this action has been taken, as we spoke about a few months ago, when you look at some of the texts and private communications between policemen at Charing Cross Station, there does seem to be to put it at its mildest, a fairly heartless and vulgar attitude to the crimes that are afflicting Londoners, and policemen bantering about, raping their suspects and witnesses, as if it's all just a big laugh to them.
It's not just that, it's the inquest that was held this week, which was around the 4 young men that were killed by Stephen Port. Now, no amount of changes in legislation, no amount of changes in any way, shape or form could have resulted in such a botched investigation. They didn't even send off, stuff for forensication. They didn't look at the notes there was a note supposedly written, a suicide note. They didn't even compare the handwriting. Now, that's not about legislation. That's not about giving police more powers. That's actually using the powers you've got to look after your community and look after the people that you have a duty of care to. And that's where the failures are. And those failures have come right from the top, where the leaders haven't dealt with this core of officers who shouldn't be police officers. And Mark, I've got to say it, the majority of police officers are good, caring individuals who are there for the right reasons. And my heart goes out to them and also the communities of London.
Well, we always hear that it's just a few bad apples. Harvey Proctor, who was on this show, and as you know, this was the absurd investigation, totally faked up by some weird fantasist that Scotland Yard fell for, that ensnared all kinds, not just prominent figures, but relatively ordinary fellows like Harvey Proctor, who was just like working as a kind of social secretary for the Duke of Rutland. That's not a big time job or anything, so his life was ruined. He lost everything. He says we need a royal, he thinks the entire sense of policing as established by Sir Robert Peel 200 years ago is now so off the rails. We need a royal commission to look at what police should be, what they should be doing, how it should be organised, and we need to go back to scratch.
When you say that there's a few bad uns or a few wrong uns, no, it's more than that. There's a central core of people who shouldn't be in the job. And even like Wayne Couzens, he was known as the rapist. He was allowed to transfer into the Met. Now, with the HMIC FRS, they can actually take action against the Met Police. They can hold them to account. So, but to do that, you have to admit you've got a problem. Now, if you're going around saying we're not homophobic, we're not racist, we're not sexist, we do go to burglaries, we do deal with online child abuse, then you're not going to look for the solutions. And that's what the problem is. They're not looking for the solutions because they're not admitting they've got a problem. And at the moment, there's a vacuum in that leadership. And they've got somebody, Steve House, who's holding the fort, who came from a failing police service in Scotland, because he was the guy who was in charge when the young couple were left for 3 days in a car before one of them died in hospital after being found 3 days later. So you've got these people moving around who are not actually making the right changes.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, it's astonishing to me how even the
true.
guy from no, I take it as true, but I'm astonished. For example, but just to go back to the whole sexual offences thing, you know, clearly in certain towns, across every corner of the country, we've had these horrifying stories of rape gangs allowed to operate with impunity for years on end. They're all friends with the coppers. In Oldham, we just heard they picked up the 12-year-old girl in the lobby of the police station. You know, so the police station is where you go to find 12-year-old girls. And we've had all these stories. But the Charing Cross incident in London suggests that even when they're not nodding and winking at industrial scale gang rape, there is a general culture of sexism. Your book suggests that's true, so that the whole thing seems to operate on a continuum of kind of heartlessness to the sexual assault of the most vulnerable.
One of the biggest points is that when officers are brave enough to call out inappropriate behaviour by their colleagues, they are then made to suffer. They are the ones who are sent to Coventry. They're the ones who are penalised, victimised, because there isn't a safe environment to actually say, well, I think that guy over there is acting, he's wrong. What he's doing is wrong. There isn't that safe environment. And instead of dealing with those issues, they start blaming the person who is brave enough to stand up to it all. And that's the culture. That's one of the cultures that needs to change in the Met. And when you are investigated, you're investigated by your mates. It's somebody who might have been working with you yesterday who's now part of the complaints team. So there's no independence of that investigation. And when you look at these organisations such as HMIC, I do believe that they can make a difference. And I do believe that if they hold the Met to account, and there's other forces as well, they could actually improve policing, because without trust and confidence, it's like, would your nan pick up the phone and ring up and say, can I have some help, please? Because she's going to be listening to all these stories and thinking, no, which one am I going to get? Am I going to get a good one, or am I going to get one of the bad ones?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very good way of putting it, Parm. Thank you very much. We will see whether this HMIC thing turns out to be something real, but there is a crisis in British policing, I think, and it needs to be addressed in some fundamental way. Thank you, as always, for joining us. Always great to see you.